All right, welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. It is a special interview segment here on the podcast. I'm Sean Meyers, your host, joined by a very special guest. He is the founder of KSWA. His name is Bob Orkwis. Bob, thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here today. We're going to get into KSWA momentarily and delve into what that promotion brings to the table. But first, I want to get your background. Every time I have someone on, whether it be a co-host or a guest, how they became a wrestling fan initially. So I'd love to hear from you on how you first got into the world of professional wrestling.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, since I'm probably your oldest guest, I've been a wrestling fan for a long time, so I need to thank my parents for that, for never making me turn the television off when I was younger. But I just always have been a fan of wrestling. From the mid-'70s, I saw my first match live. It was February of 1978, I believe, which entailed superstar Billy Graham and Polish Power Ivan Putski in a cage match at the then Civic Arena with Bucky Palermo, who recently passed on, as the referee. And Ivan Putski, of course the face, was poised to win, was on top of the cage blowing kisses, and Bucky opened the door and superstar Billy Graham slid out, and a soon-to-be 13-year-old Bobby O was quite angry over that. And a soon-to-be 13-year-old Bobby O was hooked on professional wrestling from that time. Then it just, I had been a fan all these years until I got involved in our KSWA promotion, but still a big fan, and anyone who gets into this business is probably first and foremost, Sean, as you know, a fan first.
Did you, I know you mentioned the Polish Power, did you have any other favorites growing up obviously, throughout the 1980s there were some really big stars, or maybe even some stars that sort of predated your story that you found out about maybe after you went to your first show?
Well, always a fan of Bruno Sammartino, who recently passed away. I had the honor and the privilege of meeting Bruno. I'm rooting for Polish Power right then, also being a Polish guy. That kind of played in. For some reason, I liked Bob Backlund because back at the time, he was portrayed as a true and a real wrestler, which he was. So I kind of liked that. As we progressed into the 80s, Hulkamania, of course, changed the landscape. But parallel to that, I was a fan of NWA, Ric Flair, who to me is, Lex Luger always was called the total package. I think Ric Flair was the total package because his in-ring work was unquestioned, his promo work was unquestioned, his storytelling was unquestioned, his success was unquestioned. So, always a big fan of Ric Flair. Not as much a fan of individual wrestlers nowadays. Have a great amount of respect for their abilities. Their athleticism is off the charts, greater than it's probably ever been. But personality-wise, it's different. There's a lot of reasons for that, as we may delve into. But those are some of the things, especially Ric Flair, who just transcended generations. I understand the impact of Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania as to entertainment, wrestling entertainment, sports entertainment, where we're at now. The reason for that, I have, same way I have respect for Stone Cold Steve Austin, who issued in the Attitude Era. But nowadays, I don't know, it's a little different. Maybe because I'm older, and maybe that's a question I would need to ask my son, since he's quite younger. But I don't attach as much to the wrestlers as I do to other things nowadays.
So let's talk a little bit about KSWA, the Keystone State Wrestling Alliance. By my research, started right around 2000. I don't know if you officially got things underway in 1999 or if maybe it was 2000, but it was in that general time frame. I just want to get the background of how this came to be. Obviously, a lot of work goes into creating a wrestling promotion. So how did you get the idea, and what was the legwork that really got this up and running?
Well, I didn't come in initially when it first started. We're in our 18th year, which makes us Pittsburgh's longest running wrestling promotion. And we've lasted longer than anyone, and we've had really great success the last couple of years. But back in the early 2000s, several guys had got into it wrestling, and how I got involved is, as you know, and as people are probably finding out now, I'm not afraid to talk on the microphone or in front of cameras and things like that. So they needed someone who could talk and someone who could actually be their ring announcer. So I came in as the ring announcer before advancing to several positions, and then becoming the actual owner when the old owner got into some problems, if you will, some gambling debts, which enabled myself to step in and purchase the company and buy the company, become the owner as far as that goes, and it's been a great run. But much like myself, it was just a bunch of guys who were wrestling fans and started doing it. You got to meet the right people, you got to get the right equipment, which had happened, and then we just kept moving up and on. We've been based primarily for most of our life as a promotion in Lawrenceville, which we're back now. For a few years we were in Bloomfield, so the same area in the East End. We had wrestled we're at the Spirit Hall right now, which is our home base. It was our home base. We had a good run when it was the Moose, the Lawrenceville Moose, but the Lawrenceville Moose closed down. We moved for a few years to the Teamsters Temple, just a few blocks away. We've been back to the Spirit Hall now for a couple of years, and it's been a great partnership between them and us, and it's just been a great amount of fun. And that's the key to, obviously, when you're doing everything. If it's fun, you're going to continue to do it, and we continue to do it.
Now, obviously, the owner of the company, you have a lot of responsibility with that, but it seems like you take on a pretty big role at all of the shows as well. You're not just doing stuff behind the scenes. You're out there as a performer, and you're sort of, in a sense, the face of KSWA. Obviously, it's the wrestlers who are in there really, for the most part, doing the heavy lifting when it comes to the entertaining of the fans. But when you go to a KSWA show, you're very heavily involved. So what goes on behind the scenes, and how busy are you, not only during the showtime itself, but the days and weeks leading up to it, and even after the final bell sounds that night?
Well, first and foremost, you're exactly right. The wrestlers deserve all the credit because they're doing great things and entertaining the fans. I am proud and honored that I get to be the face or the voice, and the face and the voice. Maybe not so proud and honored, my family maybe not so proud and honored when I'm out there getting beat up every now and then. But I do like to get involved that way. I haven't formally trained as a wrestler, but it's fun to be involved in that way as well. We have the greatest fans, by the way. We lovingly refer to them as the KSWA Crazies, as you know, Sean. But it depends on our schedule. And this year, we are embarking on what may be our busiest schedule ever. Of course, all those schedules are subject to change, but we're looking to have more than over 20 events this year. So that makes us a little busier. And there are several of us who get together. We would comprise the booking committee or the championship committee, and determine what matches are based on wrestlers' availability and things like that. And depending on where the shows are, we are PG-13, and we pride ourselves on that. So it's pretty kid-friendly, as much as we can be kid-friendly, because it's physical. What we do is physical. So that's busy. Show days are extremely busy. Usually most of our shows are always on Saturdays. We do have some shows that take place on other days, sometimes Friday night, sometimes on Sundays. It gets busier the night before because unlike the bigger organizations, WWE specifically, it's hands-on. It's all hands on deck when you're running a local independent organization. So it's busy Friday, Saturday, almost the entire day involves, moving the ring and setting up the ring and setting up the venue and things like that. A lot of stuff behind the scenes where you have to get your hands dirty. And then it is kind of busy during the 2.5 to 3 hours that the show is going on, but it's a little less busy on a good night. I'm going to knock on wood because, things happen. We have to change up on the fly, but That's the fun part, because then you actually get to entertain our crowd, and then you have to take off the suit or the singlet or whatever you're wearing. Maybe the case. I don't always wear a suit. I push business casual, being the owner. And then you have to get dirty again, because you have to unpack it. Can't leave it at the venue. We have to haul it around and store it. Then it starts again every time we have events. So it's kind of busy. It's fun. Again, that's a labor of love. I'm sure anyone who is involved with the KSWA or independent wrestling would tell you the same thing.
Now, you mentioned 20 or so shows throughout the course of the year. What are some of the bigger shows? Because I know you have more than just 20 regular wrestling shows. You sort of have some traditions there with the company. And how many fans do you typically attract throughout the course of a year?
Well, we're on a good roll. Last year we had close to 5,000 fans, which is a record, and we're easily on pace to beat that this year. Our first several events through the first third of the year, the first quarter of the year actually, we were well over 1,000 people, so it's been great. Big thank you to any KSWA crazy or KSWA fan is out there watching. We appreciate that support. We don't take that lightly. Our big show, as far as the Spirit Hall, and we always try to consider, we have other venues where we go elsewhere on the road, but that's always where we consider our big shows, because we're there 9 shows, maybe 8 or 9 shows a year. Comes in December, which is our Fan Fest show, which, as the fans of the KSWA know, it's on par with WrestleMania. It's our biggest show. It's where we, move from one year to the other as far as our stories and our wrestlers and the performers go. And it's also a great night for us and for me personally, because that's the night we give back. We have tons of giveaways, we have auctions, and I love giving back to the fans because they give so much to us. So that's a big show. In March, we have our annual Joe Abbey tournament, which sets up some tag team matches, and also that's our Hall of Fame night, where we honor past wrestling personalities and wrestlers and performers from Western Pennsylvania, because we pride ourselves on being Western Pennsylvania's premier independent wrestling organization. And our January show, Battle Bowl, is a great tradition. It's a fun night. You mentioned it, being in as a performer. That's the one night a year I know that I'm gonna be involved in a match normally, so I get in there. My family thinks I'm crazy, but aren't we all crazy to get into this business? So that's the one time I know that I may actually get beat up. The other times, I have to keep my eyes open. So those are, as far as the Spirit shows, those are some of the big ones. We've been annually involved in the Lawrenceville Fireworks Celebration, which is a free show at Arsenal Park, which I think we're going to be our 12th year as far as that. We've been involved in Millville days now, ever since they had the floods back in the late 2000s. That's a 2-day free show event, Friday and Saturday, usually the second week of September, which is great to be involved in. And our latest tradition has been a great tradition. It is the Brawl Under the Bridge, which is in Homestead, under the historic Homestead Graves Bridge, which rain or shine. So if you're planning on coming this year, July 21st, fans know, rain or shine, because the bridge makes for a pretty good umbrella. I'm just saying. It's been great. This will be our 4th year. We have some exciting matches. We actually have the Rock and Roll Express coming back to visit the KSWA. That was great. We had our biggest crowd ever to attend any KSWA event there last year. We had over 600 people, so we hope to shatter that record this year. So those are just some of the standard events you can get if you follow the KSWA or become a fan.
Now, you had mentioned the Hall of Fame. I was at one of your Hall of Fame shows, but if you go on the website, you see some legendary names. And you had mentioned Bruno Sammartino, but you don't just stay in the world of professional wrestling. You have some other local celebrities to Western Pennsylvania, to the Pittsburgh area. I know our colleague Lanny Fratteri was one of them. So talk about how much fun it is for the Hall of Fame and how that really comes about, because you're bringing back some guys that have not, in some of their cases, been in the spotlight for maybe decades, but they finally get the recognition they deserve, at least for one night.
Well, I think some of the wrestlers that we choose to honor are grinders, if you will. Not only some of the big names, and they've had long careers. And before I got into this, I remember seeing a couple of them. Joe Abbey, who wrestled as the Red Demon, Frank Durso. I remember seeing them in my youth wrestle, and some of them were not always big winners, but they were guys you saw all the time. So we like to honor that tradition. You mentioned Lanny Fratteri. There's a baseball tie-in. Our tie-in and our role model, really, Sean, is studio wrestling. So anyone who's familiar with that, Bill Cardill, who, like you and I, a broadcaster, probably the broadcaster around these parts when it came to studio wrestling. We also inducted him into our Hall of Fame. They had a baseball tie-in with my trainer, who's also in our Hall of Fame. Lanny Fratteri was a natural as far as that goes. He's been a guest ring announcer for us for several years. So I appreciate my good friend Lanny doing that, helping us out. It was a no-brainer in the Hall of Fame this past year. Dante DiNucci was entered into the Hall of Fame. Cody Michaels, was his ring name, who was very special to me because, like me, was a graduate of Lawrenceville Catholic, and being that we represent Lawrenceville, he was in there. Brian Hildebrand, who wrestled a little bit, but most renowned as Mark Curtis, the manager and his referee, was also inducted. And the greatest thing, and one of the contemporaries, and I mentioned that I had met Bruno. There was a chance to meet him during our Hall of Fame induction ceremony. One of his contemporaries has become a great friend of the KSWA, and it's really cool to have him around when he comes to our shows. Not everyone, but often enough. Dominic DiNucci, who lives in the Freedom area. Dominic, just a great guy. Not quite as renowned as Bruno, but up there nonetheless. But it's been great, and he comes around, and he's just a really, really cool guy to be around in fast act. So that's what we do. We try to honor Western Pennsylvania and the history of wrestling in Western Pennsylvania specifically.
And you have so many great names in there. You also have maybe guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame, but legends in their own right to come back and wrestle. You mentioned the Rock and Roll Express. I know you've had Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the Honky Tonk Man, Demolition. That's a way where, maybe the younger fans, it doesn't mean as much, but if you get maybe a parent of one of those youngsters in there, they maybe don't watch wrestling today, but they remember from the 70s or 80s or even the early 90s. Is that a way to kind of appeal to all sorts of different ages of your fans by bringing in some of these legends?
Twofold, and that's one of them, because some of our older fans, you mentioned some parents remember them, but surprisingly, most of our fans, and kudos to the crazies, they get it. So, with the onset of the internet and Google and YouTube and Wikipedia, they know the history. It's pleasantly surprising when we make the announcements, such as Demolition and Demolition Axe specifically, because he's a local guy originally, so he's in our Hall of Fame, and he's been up several times, and the Rock and Roll Express now will be here multiple times, and Cheeto Santana, and you mentioned it, Hacksaw Jim Duggan was great, Hillbilly Jim. These guys are great to hang around, so part of me reverts back to that 13-year-old because I'm a fan, and it's cool to meet these guys. But our fans are very appreciative of what they've done in their past and their history. So that makes for it. So that's really a great thing, because I don't want to say that when we bring them in, they're surprised, but they are kind of, Sean, because, it's a younger crowd, but they get equal respect from our fans no matter what age they are.
Let's talk a little bit about your current roster. You have about, 30 or so guys that you would say are active competitors for you. Discuss how you find some of these guys, because I know some of them are local, some of them come from quite a distance away, and how really this roster has developed and evolved over the years.
Well, several of them are long-timers who've been with the organization from its inception. Some of them are newer finds, where a few have contacted us and have come in and trained. You can contact us, KSWA.net, if anyone's out there interested, yourself included, Sean. Also, it's through connections. One of our Hall of Famers and current performers on the roster, Lord Zoltan, knows pretty much everyone, and I'm not going to exaggerate by saying 97% of people in this wrestling business. It's, you make contacts that way, contacts through other wrestlers who come in and say, I know a guy who's interested, and they bring him in. If they fit, they cut the mustard. Then sometimes we bring them in. So several different ways that we find talent that way. Some of them maybe come in and get discouraged because it is a lot of work. It's not, just wrestling. There's a lot more involved in it. So that's how we find it. But we got a great roster. You mentioned it, 30 performers are on there. Not everyone is always available because of other obligations and things like that. But 20, maybe 2 dozen we have available for each show, and we try to book our shows accordingly. But it's been great. Our current champion, our heavyweight champion, is Mitch Napier, and he is on a run of over 400 days of holding and defending the KSWA heavyweight title, which, by the way, is the most prestigious title in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And sometimes I can put on my PR hat there, Sean, but it is.
Now, you talk about he being the heavyweight champion. You have 4 different titles, so it seems like that's something that over the years, if you can have 4 different titles that are defended pretty regularly, that's not easy to do. It's a lot of work, I'm sure, that goes behind that with the different storylines and making sure you have people that are reliable and able to make those types of commitments. But it seems like it's a real benefit to KSWA to have all those titles and to really give more meaning to a lot of the matches.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And then we tried that. We focused on that, and we hope that comes across. Our second most prestigious title is the Golden Triangle Championship, currently held by the AA Anthony Alexander. We also have the 5-Star Championship, which is held by the Jester. You and I were joking before we went on the podcast that he probably would have been a better guest for your show, being that he's the 5-Star champion. Future idea maybe right there.
There we go.
We have the tag team champions too. Team Don't Care, Dennis Gregory and Bubba the Bulldog currently hold those belts.
And by the way, Bubba the Bulldog, people, if they don't recognize the wrestling name, he's a person that is well known in Pittsburgh, a radio personality for 20 or so years. He's
currently does the morning show on Star 100.7, but he's been a wrestling as long as I've known him to be a radio personality too. So he's been a great addition to our roster. Although Mr. Gregory and Mr. Bulldog don't necessarily like the decisions that I have to make, being the owner, but you'll get that being in this position. So they're the current tag team champions. We also have a belt that was created specifically for the Brawl Under the Bridge, which primarily is defended at the show in Homestead, but we've had a couple occasions where we've had it defended other times. So we have some secondary belts like that. And we've had some belts in the past, a Pittsburgh champion, some belts like that we've had and retired. But our primary belts, as you talked about, are 4 of them: our heavyweight champion, our Golden Triangle Championship, our 5-Star Championship, and our Tag Team Championship. And, you mentioned it, there are factors, availability, injuries, things like that, where they're not always defended, but they're defended pretty regularly.
One thing that I want to touch base on is what independent wrestling really means. I, much like you, at a young age got into professional wrestling, but for me it was always at the time WWF. I was watching that on TV, Hulk Hogan, very late 80s and mostly the early 90s. And I was such a big WWF fan, and of course WCW and ECW came along, and those were, major promotions that had TV deals on networks. But I don't think I saw an independent wrestling show until I was, a high school age. It was probably about 2000 or so, and it was in the Pittsburgh area. So, for me, having watched wrestling for 10 plus years at this point, I still really didn't know what exactly independent wrestling was and how it differs. It is pretty significantly different than what you would see on TV, whether you're watching WWE now or maybe even something like Ring of Honor, which is a smaller scale but still a national brand. So what is really the goals of independent wrestling from your perspective, and how would you differentiate it from what fans might see on TV? What makes it unique and stand out in that regard?
I think progressively, most of us were first and foremost fans of the WWE or WWF or WWF for older crowds, NWA for myself, which evolved into WCW, which I miss greatly. I miss the NWA and the Crockett promotion shows on Saturday night. To me, that was a great thing. And then you stumble on to the progression of you come home Friday nights, 1, 2 in the morning, and before we had cable or satellite like it is now, you find channel, I think it was channel 29 around here, you find this great ECW show. And you say, this is wild stuff, which progressed into a bigger promotion for Paul Heyman, obviously, if people are familiar with that, but then since has gone by the wayside. That was sort of independent and found its niche. Same with Ring of Honor, which kind of, is a pumped up, still independent show. But I think, to me, what independent wrestling is, it's connection with the fans. It's back to the roots of wrestling. And we at the KSWA, we pride ourselves in being very old school. We like that feeling. We love the connection. There's no greater feeling, at least for me, and I know a lot of guys feel this way too, that we're just connecting with the fans on all levels. And, I think the WWE does a fairly good job of that, but those guys are, they're not as connected. Some of them maybe more so than others, but, we're connected. We're out there. I chat and have several dozen conversations every show night with different fans about different things, and we're very accessible. And I think that's an appeal. To me, I think independent wrestling in its iteration now has changed a little bit from maybe the storytelling aspect and the old school aspect, which we pride ourselves on, to it's very athletic. Don't get me wrong. I like it. I respect that athleticism, but sometimes I think it gets just too focused on the high spots and the big moves that they do without trying to tell a story. And that has changed. Some would say for the better, some for the worse. And, even though I'm an old school fan, I'm a hybrid, and I do get both aspects as well as the entertainment aspect too. But I think it was always grassroots to me, independent wrestling. You're there, you're touching, you're feeling, you're close up to it. You can feel the sweat. Sometimes you probably feel it and you don't want to when you're sitting up close. Sometimes you might want that. You're just more involved, I think, on that level, more on a personal level, because it's right there. And, you boo and you scream at a WWE or a bigger event, Sean, but, I don't think you're as close when you're in a smaller venue with 200, 300, 400, 500 people. You're right up there, and you're yelling and screaming, and you're throwing, hopefully, crumpled up flyers and nothing more than that, or insults at the wrestlers, in case you don't like them. But I think the intimacy. When I think independent wrestling, from my aspect, it's just really about the intimacy between what's going on in the ring and what's going on with the fans.
Now, I about 2 years ago went to Raw in Pittsburgh, and completely unexpected, they were tickets that my friend said, hey, I have extra tickets, you want to come down? They were front row, and that was the first time I ever sat front row or even really close to it at a WWE show. And I remember thinking, I'd been a fan for 25 plus years.
Who came out of the blue and recognized you being the front row?
That is very accurate. I was all over television that night.
Sasha Banks, so winning the championship.
Yeah, that's right. She defeated Charlotte. But to me, that was something that I said, if a person who's not a wrestling fan sits in that situation, they will become a fan.
Sure.
But that's very rare with WWE, that you're going to be able to get tickets like that, and if you do, you're probably paying hundreds of dollars. Very rarely you're going to be able to get it at an affordable rate. So to your point, sort of the intimacy, if you can sit at an independent show, even in the third row, it's just an interaction that you don't get when you go to an arena of 10,000 people, and there's no chance that the wrestler's probably going to hear what you're saying during the match, and vice versa. You're not going to hear what they're saying unless you're very, very close. So, that sort of stood out to me when I was that close for a WWE show. That's sort of what you get all the time when you go to these smaller venues, and I think Pittsburgh's a great area for independent wrestling over the years. Certainly has produced a lot of talent, and so the KSWA is certainly a major part of that scene.
Well, thank you for that. I think your comparison is very valid. I know those people, and you watch it. I still watch it. The pleasure of watching it. My fault. My son's into wrestling, so guilty as charged as far as that goes. You can certainly respect the athleticism of those guys because you're sitting at ringside at a WWE show, which you just mentioned. You're up close and personal to that athleticism, and let's face it, those are cream of the crop wrestlers, absolutely, and cream of the crop performances most of the time. So you get to see that. But you're right, not everyone sees that. I've never been lucky enough to sit at ringside in all the years I've gone to wrestling shows. Let's say maybe a dozen rows back, and you still don't get the same feel as being right in the first row. But there's a little bit of intimacy, but not as much. There's crowd interaction at the bigger level, but not as much. The faces, the good guys, they interact obviously more. Not as much maybe as the bad guys, but I think they're focused on what they're doing. But the big aspect and the big selling point of independent wrestling, at least from my aspect as a fan, at least from my aspect as the owner of the KSWA, is that intimacy. You come out, you slap hands, you talk. People come up with match suggestions. You should do this. You should bring this person in, and always appreciate it, even though sometimes we don't always use those ideas. But that makes the difference. And again, you talked about it. You got tickets to be in the front row. I can't usually afford those tickets. You see a lot of people at ringside at the big shows, especially when it comes to pay-per-view weekends, and good for them to get there, but not everyone gets to experience that. But at an independent show, where the tickets are much less, you get that. There are a lot of factors that go into what makes it a great night, but to me, I think that's one of them. You're sitting there, you're face-to-face, and you're yelling and screaming, and maybe you're forgetting about reality for that 2.5 hours.
I want to get quickly your opinion on WWE. It's what Sean Saputo and I talk about week in and week out, and we'll have some more content upcoming later this week focusing on Raw and SmackDown. But seems to be a lot of criticism about the product currently. My take, in a very quick manner, is the in-ring performers are the best that they've probably ever been in the company. The storylines are not what they had been in years past at the peak of its popularity. To me, that's the issue, is the writing, the maybe overbooking and overwriting, not allowing superstars to sort of do things on their own. But as far as the in-ring stuff, when the right people get the opportunity, I think that the company's in great shape there. But yet, despite that, it's not nearly as popular as what it had been in years past and really generations past.
I don't disagree whatsoever, and I think maybe part of that falls in the fact that you brought in, writers who are not necessarily wrestling people, or maybe Hollywood people. And the performers are great, don't get me wrong. They are the cream of the crop. There's a ton of them. There's great. Most of them deserve to be at the level they're at, but some of the things that go on are out of their hands and what they're forced to do, and some don't get leeway whatsoever to be their own character, to build their own character, and to build their own storylines. A couple of examples, timing things too. You're going to ask me specific examples. I don't like. I respect Brock Lesnar, but I don't like the contract he signed. And there's your belt pal champion, and he's never there. He's there for pay-per-views, but he's never there. He needs to be on
some pay-per-views. The big pay-per-views, basically.
You're right. He needs to be on the episodic shows. I know there's some house shows, but what are people watching? They're watching Raw, they're watching SmackDown to get to those pay-per-views, and he's not there. The other thing is they get stuck on an idea, and they don't want to get off of it. A few years ago, the timing was bad, and specifically the polarizing wrestler is good or bad. Bad for him because I think he's a great talent, Roman Reigns. Fans don't want him because he's constantly being shoved down their throats. A few years ago, I think they needed him to win the Royal Rumble, but they had Batista win it, so then people were ticked off. The next year, AJ Styles comes in for the Royal Rumble, and he's the guy. Every fan gravitated to that. They have Roman Reigns win, so they're ticked off. So Roman Reigns kind of got into a no-win situation, and they haven't helped with the booking. But I think you're spot on, because there are sometimes I sit back and think, why would you do this? Here's what I would do. Another thing that I think hamstrings them, and I get it, because as in everything, Sean, it's money. 3 hours in Raw, I think, hurts them, trying to fill those 3 hours. Everything you're talking about money, congratulations to the WWE for the $1 billion deal that they've signed with Fox. I'm kind of excited eventually next year when SmackDown will get back to Friday nights, because I think that's a cool thing being on Friday nights. But I would agree with you. I'm not sure where the booking goes. I want to say this, and you're a fan of NXT. Every time the pay-per-view comes around, specifically with the takeovers, to me, the NXT takeovers steal the weekend. They've been the best matches and the best pay-per-view shows of those weekends, even getting into the Raws and SmackDowns afterwards.
It's a little more simplistic with NXT, right? They don't try to do too much, and they generally have clean finishes and let the wrestlers do all the work.
I think the writing is more crisp, the wrestlers, and it's great for the shows, Raw and SmackDown, and the big-time roster, the regular roster, to have that stomping grounds and proving grounds, because you're coming in with some steam behind you, some familiarity. But I just think the booking and the way things are done in NXT is just more entertaining. Maybe it's more old school, but I think they do a great job. Now, granted, there's less programming with just an hour to fill unless it's pay-per-view, so that kind of maybe dilutes the product. But again, going back to your original comment, I think many other wrestling fans would also agree that the talent is there, but the utilization and how they are utilized kind of hurts the product.
Very quickly, so you're a promoter. If you were promoting, writing, whatever, if you were at the helm of WWE for, let's say, 1 month, what would be the biggest change you would make?
I'd get the belt off Lesnar. To me, that's number one. Number two is, I don't think the Superstar shakeup has worked. I think it's diluted the products, and you're getting a lot of the same matches. I get you're trying to create an us versus them, a blue versus red, a Raw versus SmackDown dynamic, but I think it has diluted the product into where, some of the performers who are featured in the higher profile situations on both shows don't deserve to be there. Maybe you get a champion in there that can float. Whoever is the Universal Champion, one that they would sign to a contract that would guarantee that person to be there all the time. Maybe that person could float between show and show. Maybe that could spice it up. But those are a couple of things that I would do. I'm sure those aren't novel, new ideas to anyone, but given that chance to run the controls for a month, those are the switches I would flip.
I want to start to wrap this up, but I do want you to have the opportunity to sort of reach out to someone watching that might not be familiar with the KSWA and just let them know the basics. I have your Twitter up there, but I know KSWA has its own KSWA Wrestling. But what else, if someone is interested in learning more about even coming to a show, what should they need to know? How can you guide them to where they need to be?
Appreciate the opportunity to allow me to talk about that. You mentioned that Twitter is one way. KSWA Wrestling on Twitter. KSWA Wrestling on Facebook is another way. The easiest way, the best way, because you can get to the other avenues through our website, which is KSWA.net. There's a link and contact numbers there to call us, whether you're interested in coming as a fan. Ticket prices and special events are listed on there. All of our events are listed on there. Whether you're interested in becoming a wrestler or if you want to help in some other way, that's the way to contact us, KSWA.net. You can send us an email. You can call us. That is the easiest and the best way to get a hold of us. You mentioned it. There are superstar profiles up there. There are weekly and monthly news stories. There are event recaps, our event schedule, our appearance schedule. They're all there. Our history is up there as well. You can go all the way back to match number 1 to where we are now in our 18th year. Everything you need to do is everything you need to do and to find out about us is on there, including, if you'll indulge me, our next 4 shows. June 23rd, we're going to be at the Spirit Hall. June 30th is the Lawrenceville Fireworks Celebration, which is a free show. It's an outdoor show, so weather is always permitting. There's a rain date on July 1st for that one as well. But that's always a great show to get out there in front of the fans. July 14th, one of our niches is we love to do fundraisers. We've been involved in so many great fundraisers. This will be the 3rd year now that we're going to be involved, 3rd or 4th year with the Children's Miracle Network through Sam's Club. We're going to be in Lower Borough on the 14th. for a big fundraiser. That has grown over the years. And I talked about it, Brawl Under the Bridge. It'll be Brawl Under the Bridge 4 this year, July 21st, under the Homestead Grays Bridge.
So a busy couple of months upcoming for KSWA and for Bobby O, as he's affectionately known. Bob, I want to thank you for taking the time. It wasn't necessarily easy getting the technology to work at first, but we fought our way through it to do this. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to request your presence once again in the future. Sean Saputo, busy man, sort of tough making the schedule every week to get him involved. I have a couple other guys, including Kyle Dawson, that have helped out, but we're always looking for people to jump on and give their thoughts on the current state of professional wrestling. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll talk again pretty soon in the future.
I've watched the show, a couple of the podcasts, so keep up the good work, Sean. Thank you for the invitation and having me on. I'm always available to talk wrestling, KSWA specifically, and I may know a guy who could get you some of the KSWA wrestling personalities as well.
There we go. There we go.
Some you want, some you may not, but I may know that guy for you. But thank you again for having me, Sean.
All right, that was Bob Orkwis. That's going to wrap up this special interview edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Of course, we will be back later this week with our thoughts on Raw and SmackDown with the Raw recap and the SmackDown summary as well. But that's going to do it for this installment. Once again, I want to thank Bob Orkwis of KSWA for joining us. We'll hope to see you again soon here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.